Hi, everyone. This is Alex Aranda.
And this is Steve McKeon.
And this is Luca Munoz. And this is the Leadership Exchange. We were talking about a lot of topics we wanted to potentially talk about. What do you guys think we should settle on?
Yeah, Lupe, we're in conversation last couple of days. And I think the one that we really landed on yesterday, or actually was Friday, leading the world of AI. And I like this topic just because it is every day something that myself as a leader am facing. And I would say that every leader listening right now is making an AI decision this week, whether they know it or not. You know, some are making that decision by acting on it. Some are making that decision maybe by avoiding using it or directing people away from it. In either case, it's everywhere as we see our regular search engines now starting to use AI. And so I think what was really kind of important in part of this conversation today goes back to an episode we had with Ron Crabtree. And Ron had made the statement that AI technology isn't a problem for leaders. It's a leadership problem that happens to involve technologies. And he also went on to say that leaders who lead or are team members and people that will use AI will outperform those that don't. And as a leader, you have to be able to lead people through how to use AI. And I think that'll be a great conversation for us to have today. So with that brief introduction, let me throw it back to you and Alex.
Well, this is a very interesting subject. I think one of the biggest questions that comes to mind around AI is certainly there's case after case demonstrating how it can help automate tasks, how it can help with expediting some of the transactional activities that we all have in our day to day. But does it make you a better leader, or does it just make you like a faster transactional manager?
I think you hit on a very important topic related to this, or element related to this, Alex. I think we have to dissect a professional manager or director or supervisor, whatever the title you may have. You have two aspects to that role. In my opinion, those aspects are the transactional side of you and what you have to do, and then the transformational side of you. And another way to look at it is the managing aspect of your role and the leading aspect of your role. And I think if people understand the difference between those two, then we can really do a laser focus on how AI can help the transactional or the managing aspect of leading. If you can, maybe one of you guys can describe the difference between those two. What exactly is transactional? What exactly is transformational? And then we can really start to move forward on how you utilize AI.
I'll take a first cut at that. When I think about transactional, it is really using the tool and having team members begin to learn about the tool. And I'll relate this back to a group I was working with probably about a year ago, and it was multi-generational. And I really felt that I would probably have more difficulty with people that were in their work career for a much longer time than maybe folks that were new coming in. And so I made a bad assumption there because it was just the opposite of that. The folks that I was working with that were 10, 15, 20 years into their career were the first to adopt quickly. And they adopted it very transactionally in that, hey, this is going to make this task that much easier. Hey, my research is going to be this much quicker. And on the flip side, I would say it was a younger generation that really was struggling to use it because there was no trust yet. And so I think for the transformational leadership, you have to look at this as a trust aspect of how can we utilize this technology, because it's not that you can ignore it. It's how can you utilize it in a way that builds trust. And I think that's really important. So part of it is, as a leader, I think your first job is not to pick the tools, but to really answer the questions that every team member is silently asking about them. Like, what does this mean for me? Is this going to be something that takes away my work, or the the fun part of my work. And so I think that's really a big part of it.
I do have a few thoughts on this because for our listeners, I think a simple way of defining the transactional leadership versus transformational leadership. So, transactional, very heavily focused on managing performance. Well, in many cases, it's like an exchange based style versus the transformational leadership that is focused around growing people. Well, you need both because transactional activities certainly have a place in running an organization, but the transformational side of things is really what inspires people to follow the leader, and likewise, the leader is focused on growing that person or the team.
The difference between transactional and transformational is also the difference between managing and leading. So you manage things, right? You manage schedules, you manage budgets, you manage systems, but you don't manage people. You actually lead people, or at least that's what I would recommend people think of. It's like, hey, I don't manage people, I lead people, because you manage things. And so that difference between the transformational and transactional, as long as you understand that, then you can really start to see AI as a tool for the transactional aspect of what you do. And because we have to do both of those, transactional and transformative, I'll say we should be doing those two. A lot of times we get stuck in this transactional mindset where we don't really spend a lot of work and effort, the transformative aspect. But for those of us that do, I think now with AI is really going to help you eliminate or reduce some of that burden that is related to your the transactional aspect of leading.
That's a great point, Lupe. I think the way that I like to think about AI and how it can help me as a leader is, okay, if it's assisting me with doing some of those transactional activities in a much more efficient way, what am I doing with the time that AI gives me back, right? Am I going to put that time back into, doing more transactional activities so I feel super productive? Or am I using that time to spend with a junior leader, developing them and spending time with the team?
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. I think as a leader, we always talk about creating the environment for transformational leadership to take place, and really just the environment to lead your team in a way that we all believe is the right way to lead. The whole matter of, letting people have the grace of learning versus this becoming a mandate. You have to use this new technology. We got to start with creating the guardrails around how they can use it, giving some guidance around that environment creates the psychological safety in using these tools and getting people comfortable. And everybody learns differently. As I mentioned in that group that I was working with not too long ago, it was really interesting to see how quickly some adopted and didn't. And even those that were early adopters still needed some guardrails and guidance because it got out of hand pretty quick. And I think that's, as a leader, we're really managing change here versus managing AI as a tool or introducing a tool. It's no different than any other change management system or process that we would go through. And so I think that's really important to understand as a leader coming in. You don't have to be the expert in it, but what you have to do is you have to create that environment where people can begin to use it, learn, and use it in a way that's, as Alex mentions, productive, but also that is still human. And I think, Lupe, you talked about that the other day in a different conversation we were having, just the whole aspect of leading this transformation or any transformation with human intention.
I was going to go in a slightly different direction there, Steve, because when you mentioned the managing change perspective, I immediately was nodding my head up and down, thinking that, there's a lot of, conflicting opinions about the role of AI, with some people really feeling that, nope, this is not something good. In other cases, you've got leaders that feel AI is definitely safe and can be rewarding. But really, there's a lot of research out there that says those that are successful at using AI in their work as in just AI transformation are those that generally are at the forefront of championing change and that have a space for that innovation. So slightly different, Steve, but that was sort of what I was thinking about.
One of the things that really started sticking out for me is for those that have that lean background, you really start to think about like value. What's value add? What's non-value add? Value would be, it's a lean term that talks about what the customer is willing to pay for. There's a lot of other requirements that determine what's value and what's non-value. But basically, you have to be able to transform a product. It's got to be done right the first time, and the customer's got to be willing to pay for it. So that, from a lean perspective, is how value is defined. And if you use that in the context of leadership, you think about like, okay, as a leader, how do I add value? Well, I don't transform the product, so technically, it's not value add. But if you think of the customer, the internal customer versus the consumer customer, then you really start to think of, okay, how do I add value to the team and to the people? And very much like, hey, you have to transform the product for it to be value. I would say that there's the transformational perspective of leading is where we add the most value. Everything else gets in the way of that. It doesn't mean that it's not important. There's a lot of important things that you have to do that are related to keeping the wheels of business moving. But then there's the transformational aspect, which is really you're transforming the team and the people in the team. And your ability to spend more time doing that and less time doing some of the administrative things that can really consume a lot of your day. I would argue that if you have more time to do that and you actually take advantage of it and spend more time, your team will be far better in the long run. They're going to be far better, far more capable leaders, maybe, or more capable people that will have more fulfilling work lives, et cetera, because of the fact that you are spending your time on them as individuals and helping develop their skill set. I like to ask leaders this question to get their mind frame in the right direction. And that is, what's the business we're in? It doesn't matter whether it was in retail or whether it was in manufacturing, whatever that may be, that ultimately the response by people in the room will be, oh, well, we're in the business of making aircraft, or we're in the business of providing banking services. And I shake my head no. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're in the business of. And they look at me like I'm a little crazy, and they're confused. And I'm like, the moment you became a leader, you are now in the business of people. And if we keep that mindset of, hey, the people that we lead are the people that are making the product, are providing the service. That's their core function as individual contributors. But as a leader, you have to think of it very differently. And with AI, you've got to be able to leverage AI because it can enhance you, as Ron Crabtree mentioned, Steve, right? You're always going to be a better leader if you're able to master some aspects of AI and help you with those transactional functions that you have to do day to day, week to week. But then you're going to be a far better leader because of the fact that you have opened your time with AI to be able to focus on the value add aspects of your role.
The paradox is work becomes more automated. People feel like it could become more robotic, right? And less human. And I think to your point, leadership has to become more human and more empathetic, making those connections with their team as you go through any change, because change is hard for all people. And when you think about AI, I mean, all the information that we're seeing is that it's changing every 3 months. It's compounding every 6 months into even more capability, really making sure that you understand that piece of it going in as part of the change management piece, but really leaning in to the human side, I think is where a leader will win. And I think the other watch out there that we've talked about in our conversations, you, Alex, and myself, is that as teams start to use it, you still need to make sure you're leading that change by reviewing how they're using it, right? Because I think one of the challenges will be is that if people stop thinking and they just accept what answers they're getting from AI, that leads to a whole nother paradigm challenge for a leader. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that a little bit.
I think on every team, there's going to be varied levels of experience or fluency around AI. As people become aware of some of the ways in which AI can be used. And it's unfortunate, but I have seen work product that does not seem to be very, I'm trying to find a diplomatic word to use.
Missing the human touch?
Why can't you just say it, Alex? Why do you?
No, I mean, I've seen work product that feels sloppy because it's super generalized and it just reeks of AI. No one bothered to really look through it, and they allowed AI basically to provide the judgment, which that makes me a little bit nervous. I think you're right, Steve. There has to be a way to really make sure that the human touch is there.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Where's that line between, healthy experimentation and kind of reckless abandonment in using the technology? Where would you guys put that at?
I mean, there's extremes, right? And I think if we start there, then maybe we can work our way to the answer. One extreme, for example, it sounds like Alex has been dealing with some of these extremes, is where I ask AI some questions, AI generates something, I copy and paste it into my document or my presentation. So that would be like absolutely the worst, because there's no thinking that went into that. There's no proofreading. I'm just going to go with what it says. I'm not going to use my ability to reason, to do critical thinking, to make sure that it passes the sniff test, if you will. I think that's a little careless, and I think it's a little lazy for people to do that. On the other hand, maybe in that same situation, you, as the individual, you're asking for a framework. Hey, give me the framework or the outline of a topic, and then from there you start to kind of go through that iterative process of building on that. But you're guiding the build through questions and through adjustments, versus, hey, give me something and I'm just going to use that and go with it. I think that's a way to use AI, but I would say that that's a really terrible way, because the point that I think you're trying to make, Steve, is problem solving. For example, good problem solving, those skills don't happen without practice, and you can't maintain them without practicing. So you have to keep that blade pretty sharp. And the only way you do that is by actually going through the thought process yourself, versus giving it to AI to try and figure out. Now, I'm not saying don't use AI to problem solve. It can actually be very, very good at doing that, but don't abandon the whole thing, the whole task to AI, and just say, hey, whatever AI tells me is what I'm going to go with. I think it needs to augment your process, but you need to be guiding it very specifically on when you're trying to problem solve.
Yeah, that's great points there, Lupe. And I just goes back to as a leader, you have to really look at the judgment as you start to use this tool and your team start to use this tool, because judgment really becomes a human skill, right? And Alex, you talked about a little bit, if I just throw something back out that was generated in AI without a review, right? That trust but verification, it's going to be junk. And I think, Lupe, you and I talked a couple months ago a little bit about a study we had seen where groups that came in to solve problems, one group was given AI to augment the or to as part of their network for problem solving. Another group was not given it, and the group that did not have it took longer, but it was better. And then the experiment went back to use AI and then take it out of use in conversation, like the follow-up, the iterative process, and it created a tremendous solution in that sense. So AI by itself was not enough. People outperformed it. It took them much longer to get to the point where they could communicate what their thoughts were in solving this problem. But when they combined the two, it really became magical, I guess, so to speak. And so I think just as a leader, learning how to use it in that way. And then the old adage, you got to trust it, but you have to verify so that you know what is kicked out is factual. And we've all seen that. I think, Alex, your point, you've seen product produced that was substandard and probably not fully correct as well.
Steve, I would argue that as a leader, we probably have the least to worry about when it comes to like AI replacing us, right? Because I sincerely believe that, and as much as AI can advance and evolve, the ability for it to be empathetic, show compassion, these are some of the truly human aspects that I would argue AI will never be able to. Like, can you imagine AI building trust within a team? Like, I just don't see that happening. Maybe I'm holding on to the status quo some, but I just don't see that. I think transactional things, yeah, maybe. And even transactional things, they're finding more and more, right?
Yeah.
They tried that in like software development. They got rid of all these people and said, oh, AI is going to take care of that. And they're finding that it's not taking care of it. The product quality is not as good. And I think that's kind of evidence of maybe where the technology is, but also the fact that augmenting the human animal is probably what AI's real strength is versus replacing it. And I don't think that it couldn't be any more truer in the case of a leader in that role.
Agree.
Lupe, you said something about, can you imagine AI replacing humans and AI's capability with, building trust? Here's something that I think might be helpful for our listeners is you might be able to use AI with coming up with like a sample or the first version of maybe like a tough conversation that you have to have with someone, just to kind of visualize and really prepare for this conversation. Now, you're not going, at least I hope you won't be reading from a sheet of paper, word by word, line by line, but sometimes that framing that AI can help a leader with putting together is helpful. And then from there, putting it into your own words and really making it your own. As you said, the empathy piece, that is a great way on how it might be able to help a leader.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Maybe we come up with a few ideas or a few examples just to help our listeners. A few examples of how you could use AI. Like we talk about, well, you could use AI on the transactional aspect of your job. What are you guys seeing out there that you feel like, okay, yeah, that's a good use of AI to reduce the amount of time, the amount of work and burden for leaders?
Look, I'm going to go back just to some general guidance that I think any leader will want to set the stage for early. And part of it is just making sure that there's some transparency around when you're using the tool versus when you're not. I've actually seen this already in the workforce where people are trying to pass off their work product and saying, no, it was all theirs, that they hadn't did any research leveraging AI, or that they didn't use AI to help them set up that framework that you were talking about. And so I think it's really important to set that environment where you're letting people know when you're using it and sharing with them some of the information, because as knowledge happens quick, the hoarding of knowledge and not sharing how you're getting maybe a better prompt to get a answer to questions. I think it's just going to be really important. So transparency, I think, is one of the first things that kind of goes to the point that we were talking about a minute ago. How do you build trust? When you're using these tools and they're all behind the screen, you have to somehow create that transparency and honesty in what you're using it for, how you're using it. And I think as a leader, if you're able to do that and demonstrate that, it makes it easier for your team also to follow. So that's one rule. You guys have another one you would want to throw out there?
I do, and I might be taking some of Lupe's thunder here, but this was a great example he provided to me this week, and that is spending time with the team and those individuals that may not have the same AI access or the fluency, and going back to building trust. Well, spending time with those team members, helping them gain exposure and understanding of the ways in which they might be able to leverage AI is a great way of demonstrating that you're interested in helping them, you're interested in growing their skills, and you're not leaving them behind.
That's a great point, Alex. As a leader, our ability to help our team through this new tool and how to utilize it, and maybe even to help them understand how not to utilize it, right? Some of the things we're talking about today. But to me, simple things that can take a lot of time would be like, hey, I want to do a tailgate on this topic. I can ask AI to give me the most common topics on ladder safety, for example. What are the most common types of injuries? And now all of a sudden, within a few seconds, I'm going to get an outline of something I can talk to people about. I want to make sure I check my facts. I want to make sure that it's getting information from reputable sources. You don't want it to go off and, and grab something from some wacky website that has all these conspiracy theories about ladders and the deep state, that type of thing. But being able to do something like that now instead of before, that's a struggle for some people. They don't have the computer skills. They're not able necessarily to type very fast. And so something like that, as simple as that, can be like something that would be several minutes of work. So I'm spending some time talking to the leaders. I'm having small workshops, small, I'll say learning sessions where I help them understand the things that they can do on the administrative side now very, very quickly and very easily.
I think that's a great point, Lupe. I just thinking through this as well, keeping it fun, right? So anytime we're learning something, it can be drudgery or it can be fun. And if it's fun, people adopt to it quicker. And I think to the point of helping people maybe that haven't used it before, team members that are in a different place of access to the technology, how they can connect to it, because everybody's got a phone these days, and it's right there on your phone now too, right? And so I think that's the important thing with the leaders is keep it fun. And I think a KPI that you can even consider is don't focus on measuring productivity improvements as this tool comes into the workplace only. You may want to measure some productivity, I get it, but think about measuring learning, right? Measure how teams are learning to use this tool. And again, it kind of goes back to that whole transparency thing, so that it's people aren't hiding behind the screen. Instead, they're sharing how that learning is going and what they've picked up. So anyway, I think you guys are bringing up some really good points that a leader can take in this space.
Some ways in which I've found AI incredibly useful is in helping with drafting first passes of maybe a policy. I used it to help me with drafting up a first version of a development plan. It was sort of generic at first, right? Taking a job description, extracting the competencies from that job description, and translating that into a sample development plan. And that was incredibly useful. Now, obviously, it's going to be customized for the individual, but it gives you a starting point, right? That's another way. And I think even in helping leaders prepare for interviews, identifying action items coming out of a meeting when you've been running a note-taking feature to AI. Those are all some really good and helpful ways you take these transactional activities and free up time for more transformational activities. I do have one question for you guys, though. And my question would be, what stands out to you as one thing that you're going to protect with as distinctly an area where nope, you're not going to use AI?
Well, there's the personal aspect of that question, and then there's the business perspective of that question. And I think that really prompts a great topic to ensure that everybody, all our listeners understand is you need to understand if what your company's policies are on AI, because some companies have policies, some companies do not. Some are strict, some are not strict. Make sure you understand that, because you do not want to be working in AI in a manner that your business is not supportive of, or has a policy against. That would be not good for you potentially. So be careful, because some of these AI platforms, they gather that information and they share it publicly, or they sell it publicly, or do all sorts of different things. So you need to really understand that piece. And getting to your question, Alex, I like on the business side, I would not ever use information that's considered business sensitive or restricted information to feed into AI, regardless of what I'm trying to get accomplished. So I would say that that's a big watch out for all our listeners. Make sure you understand those policies. Make sure that you're not utilizing sensitive information. Some companies may have a special, I'll say, agreement with AI provider that maybe limits what they use or don't use. And in that case, they may permit the use of some of these tools with what be considered sensitive information. I know, like, for example, a lot of companies are starting to use it to determine market trends and to understand what the consumer is looking for, et cetera, doing that type of deep analysis. But those are done under special conditions, and not something that I would recommend somebody just start arbitrarily doing without the knowledge and consent of their business.
Great answers there, Lupe. Alex, I'm going to take it a little bit different direction than Lupe, and what I would not replace it with is that genuine person-to-person interaction. I think that going to the location where a situation has occurred, or visiting someone just in the pure sense of checking in to see how they're doing, the human to human aspect, I think, is something that is so important. And it could be very easy to let AI try and communicate for you, because there actually are apps now that will send notes out to people, and based on what you've put in the profile. And I just think that there's something to be said for continuing to stay engaged with people directly, and have conversations that are meaningful and personable. So that's the area that I won't give up. And I guess the question back to both of you, because we've seen AI evolve in our world over the last 2 years pretty rapidly. Think about like 5 years from now, what that's going to look like. And it's kind of mind numbing, right? And so as a leader, what do you need to think about just to not get overwhelmed by the fact that it's evolving so quick? What would you guys do in that space to stay on top of or stay connected with the advancement?
The first thing that comes to mind is, like anything else that is related to leadership or related to the whatever industry I'm in. I'm always trying to stay current, and so making sure that I'm reading articles, making sure that I'm watching whatever my method of learning is, YouTube videos, podcasts, anything like that. Staying in tune with that, because it is a major tool. It's a major paradigm shift in how you use it. There's a lot of different things phrases that I could use to describe it. It's a big deal. And because it's a big deal and has the potential to really benefit or damage your team and their ability to do their work, your understanding of it, I feel, is crucial. And making sure that you're able to know the watch outs, know the tricks, and be able to help and guide your team. I don't feel that you should ignore it. I think that's a big mistake. And being able to stay ahead of it, it's kind of like with your kids, like understanding social media and the influence it can have on your kids, especially at their young age. And all of those things, you can stick your head in the sand and say, well, I really don't want to deal with that. I really don't want to think about it. I don't want to engage in that. I don't want to learn about it. That's fine. You can do that. But I would caution all of you, if you have that mindset. And same with this and AI, is be cautious, because if you decide to ignore it, then it could potentially cause damage to what your leaders do and to what the team does ultimately, because whatever the leader does can influence the rest of your team. So that would be my opinion on that topic, Steve.
What comes to mind is, first and foremost, and this is my experience, in that I it can be very easy to become overwhelmed with not just AI, but any tool, if I'm, trying to keep up versus really understanding that my role is more focused around keeping pace, right? So I don't need to learn every single latest and greatest AI tool or way in which it's being used, maybe focusing primarily on what are the things that are most relevant for my function and for my team, focusing more on maybe like two or three, a couple of ways in which I can use AI in a very practical way, instead of trying to learn everything under the moon, right? Because then that can really become like just a quick spiral to overload.
Here's what I would say is that as part of leader standard work, you have to invest in yourself. And I think just building into your weekly schedule the opportunity to learn, right? To take a different part of this new world of AI and just learn a little bit more about it, and then think in terms of, okay, is this going to apply to my team? What would make the most sense for me to maybe learn more? And I think then it really can even get down into, what are the right tools I should be using and learning more about, because there's so many different ones out there. Had a good conversation with my son last week, and we had a chance to spend a little bit of time together in Dublin. And, he was describing to me how, as a company, his company uses 4 or 5 different tools based on the skill. So the one that is, more analytical versus the one that is kind of inspirational or outward looking, to even the ones that are really kind of art design. And I think, one of the things that any leader should start thinking about is the different tools, the mainstream tools that are out there. What is the best one for specific applications? Because I think you don't have to be an expert on the tool, but I think understanding which tools are best to use in certain situations can really be a game changer as a leader, but also to help your teams.
I think we should figure out how to wrap this up.
Here's a closing thought that I have, is that when you think about the internet back in the 90s, the paradigm then was companies were saying, do we really need to use the internet within the work environment? Do I need a website? what is that really going to do? And that was game changer, right? Fundamentally, those that adopted early benefited early from it, and I think we're at that same transition here. This is a revolution taking place, and it's going to reward, I think, leaders and companies that learn to use it in very human ways. My concern, and I think the concern across the world, is just weaponization of this type of technology, and how we need to really make sure that as humans we're in charge of the technology. And I think if we go in with that mindset, it'll be helpful, beneficial, and it's here, I think, is the other thing. There's no way to ignore it anymore. So as a leader, you really need to start to understand it and figure out how you can support your teams in this space.
Great point, Steve. And if I could add to that, I see this as leaders, it's not a question of do you use AI or do you not? It's really about what do you do with the time that AI gives you back? How do you choose to invest that time? I would want to emphasize the importance of spending time with the team in those transformational activities.
I was thinking about the beach, but I see what you're saying. That's good. Yeah.
And I think the final thought I'll add to the great points you both made is that as leaders, or as individuals, those listeners out there, this is completely within your ability to learn and understand. We can use the approach of, hey, well, my boss hasn't told me to, or my boss isn't sending me to training, isn't doing this. All this stuff is available out there on the internet. All of this, there's YouTube, whatever method you use to learn, you can go there on your own, teach yourself, learn about all of this, and be decent at it. And I think that from a self-accountability standpoint, you have that versus the excuse of, well, no one really taught me, no one ever, you got to kind of grab the bull by the horns and make it happen. So I'll say those words of inspiration to people is, hey, go make it happen. And learn about this, because it's coming whether you want it or not, and you can either be part of it and use it and help your team be able to use it in an intelligent way, a meaningful way, or you can let it bulldoze you and your team, and at that point, who knows what can happen. It's a really great topic. I think there's lots of different aspects of this that we'll probably visit in the future. But until then, this is Lupe Munoz.
This is Alex Aranda.
And I'm Steve McKeon. Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Exchange.
Have a great day.